Welcome to another week of daily devotionals in the Growing Disciples program. Today we're continuing the narrative of the Old Testament. Previously in 2 Samuel we saw that in the latter half of King David's reign, attention turned very much to the question of his successor. Who would it be? In 2 Samuel 7, God had promised that one of David's offspring would ascend to his throne, from where he would rule God's kingdom with great power, his reign enduring forever before God. Instead of David, this subsequent king would build a great house for God, a temple. In the Psalms, this theme of a king greater than David, still to come, also featured. And so the book of 1 Kings begins with the question of succession. Already we've seen David's oldest son, Amnon, murdered by number 3 son, Absalom. Number 2 son, Daniel, just disappeared while Absalom chose to mount a coup against his own father, ultimately being killed in the civil war which followed. So now, who are the obvious candidates? Well, the first candidate to step up to the plate in 1 Kings is son number 4, Adonijah. And we pick up the narrative in 1 Kings 1 verse 5. Now Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, put himself forward and said, "I will be king." So he got chariots and horses ready with 50 men to run ahead of him. His father had never rebuked him by asking, "Why do you behave as you do?" He was also very handsome and was born next after Absalom. Adonijah conferred with Joab, son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest, and they gave him their support. But Zadok the priest, and Benaiah son of Jehoiada, and Nathan the prophet, Shimei and Rei, and David's special guard did not join Adonijah. Adonijah then sacrificed sheep, cattle and fattened calves at the stone of Zoloheth near En-rogel. He invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the royal officials of Judah. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, or Benaiah, or the special guard, or his brother Solomon. Adonijah makes a fairly logical assumption. He's the next in line. So he makes an alliance with the military. Joab is the commander of the army. And he makes an alliance with the religious leadership. Abiathar seems to be one of the senior priests at the tabernacle. And just in case it mattered, in verse 6 we're told Adonijah was very handsome. He looked the part. What does King David, still alive and holding on to power, what does he do? Nothing, as is highlighted by our text. Nothing. Unfortunately, this has become a bit of a pattern for David. It seems that there is uncertainty, enough for some very important people to withhold their support from Adonijah. Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet and Benaiah, a senior military officer, along with the royal bodyguard, they do not back Adonijah. And when Adonijah holds a big coronation party, they're not invited, nor is Solomon, who is the only one of Adonijah's brothers not invited to the party. Zadok, Nathan and Benaiah do the logical thing. They stay behind and instead they ask David who his successor should be. Perhaps being closest to David, they had some insider information, but they seem to know of a promise that David made to Bathsheba, that Solomon, her second born to David, was the chosen one. Bathsheba reminds David of this in verse 17. Bathsheba said to him, "My lord, you yourself swore to me, your servant by the Lord your God, Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he will sit on my throne. But now Adonijah has become king, and you, my lord the king, do not know about it. He has sacrificed great numbers of cattle, fattened calves and sheep, and has invited all the king's sons, Abiathar the priest and Joab the commander of the army. But he has not invited Solomon your servant. My lord the king, the eyes of all Israel are on you, to learn from you who will sit on the throne of my lord the king after him." So it's well past time for David to speak up. So David agrees, and he confirms to Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the commander that Solomon is to be anointed king and given the full support of the royal guard. David's personal endorsement is also to be made public as Solomon rides through the city on David's royal donkey. So Solomon is duly anointed king and proclaimed to be so, much to the surprise and consternation of everyone who has been celebrating with Adonijah. So in verse 41 we read, Adonijah and all the guests who were with him heard it, that is, they heard the noise of the celebration of Solomon's coronation. They heard it as they were finishing their feast. On hearing the sound of the trumpet, Joab asked, "What's the meaning of all the noise in the city?" Even as he was speaking, Jonathan, son of Abiathar the priest, arrived. Adonijah said, "Come in. A worthy man like you must be bringing good news." "Not at all," Jonathan answered. "Our Lord, King David, has made Solomon king. The king has sent with him Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and they have put him on the king's mule. And Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet have anointed him king at Gihon. From there they have gone up cheering, and the city resounds with it. That's the noise you hear. Moreover, Solomon has taken his seat on the royal throne." Well, immediately the party's over. Everyone runs away, not wanting to be seen opposing the new king. Adonijah takes refuge in the tabernacle, holding on to the horns of the altar before the mercy seat of God. He pleads with Solomon, "Do not put me to death." Solomon pardons him and sends this word to him: if he, Adonijah, shows himself to be worthy, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground. But if evil is found in him, he will die. Then King Solomon sent men, and they brought him down from the altar. And Adonijah came and bowed down to the King Solomon, and Solomon said, "Go to your home." Soon after this, David dies and Solomon goes about establishing his kingdom. He gets rid of Joab, the commander of the army. He dismisses Abiathar the priest. Both these men had been the supporters of Adonijah, and he carries out the instructions of David, including settling some of David's old scores on his behalf and generally putting things to right. But just when things are starting to settle down, Adonijah goes to Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, and persuades her to ask Solomon, on his behalf, to give King David's platonic concubine, Abishag, to him in marriage. It's a blatant power move, a claim to be his father's true successor. Solomon sees right through it, even though the request was promoted by his own mother. Adonijah is put to death for proposing such a divisive plan, a threat to Solomon's legitimacy as David's successor. 1 Kings chapter 2 then concludes with these words: "The kingdom was now established in Solomon's hands." And so Israel's first royal succession has taken place. Transition has occurred, and Solomon stands as the new king over Israel, universally acknowledged. But there's a problem. The text doesn't say there's a problem. The text is silent. I've read back over it a few times and I can't find the piece that's missing. What is it? It's the bit where God chooses Solomon as David's successor. Now, throughout these first 2 chapters, God is silent. He's mentioned, oaths are taken in his name, but nowhere does God indicate his choice as to who should succeed David. David chooses Solomon for no apparent reason other than he promised Bathsheba that he would. Such a significant moment surely demands that all God's people turn to him for wisdom and for his direction. If David was delaying making a decision or making the announcement, surely submitting this decision to God's direction would have solved a lot of the problems for everyone. But there is silence. Later on, God will endorse Solomon, but in the moment of crisis, no one thought to ask God what should be done, which surely must get us thinking. Are there parts of our lives in which we invite God's opinion, and yet other parts where we don't? We might seek God's will about whom we will marry or whether to join this church or that church. They seem like the kind of issues that it's good to ask God's wisdom and direction for. But what about our finances? Have you consulted God and His Word about how you might structure your finances or your will or your retirement plan? What about that promotion that you're offered at work? Would you pause and ask God to guide you as to whether to accept that promotion at work or what to do with that unexpected windfall? What about your social life? What might God choose for you with regard to your social activities? I want to encourage you now to prayerfully set before God some decision or some area of your life that you've not previously sought His wisdom about. And as you pray about this issue, what scriptures, what parts of the Bible seem relevant? Will you perhaps consult a respected and wise Christian friend and seek their input on your decision, whatever it is? Who else is there that might help you? Every part of our lives is under God's rule, so let's seek His will for all of our lives.